Imagine this. It's Vienna, late at night. The date is July 23rd, 1895.
Okay.
The whole city is asleep. But in one home, a doctor's having a dream that is about to change everything.
And this isn't just any dream. I mean, this is the foundational myth of psychoanalysis.
Right.
He's dreaming he's in this huge, grand banqueting hall. It's all very elaborate. And he sees a former patient of his, a woman he calls Irma.
And in the dream, he can tell Irma is sick, she's not well. And as it goes on, he has this flash of insight. He realizes her illness isn't his fault because a colleague gave her a botched injection.
Exactly. So the dream very conveniently shifts the blame, the guilt, away from him. And the details were so specific, so vivid, that when he woke up, he felt like he'd uncovered a fact.
So what does he do? He doesn't just roll over and go back to sleep?
No, he grabs a notebook. He writes down every single detail immediately. The setting, the people, what they said. And then he does something truly revolutionary. He starts to analyze it.
Not as just some random brain noise.
Not at all. He treats it like a psychological text, a code to be cracked. He analyzes it over and over, mapping it against his own anxieties about his work, about failing to cure her.
And he comes to believe that this whole story his mind created wasn't an accident at all.
No, it was a perfectly disguised message, a manifestation of his own hidden desires, his fears, his professional anxiety.
It's the ultimate aha moment.
It really is. That dream, which we now know as Irma's injection, was the very first one he subjected to that kind of intense systematic study. And it became the cornerstone for his book, The Interpretation of...
Which basically gave us the language to even talk about the unconscious mind.
Yeah.
That doctor, of course, was Sigmund Freud.
The man himself.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We are doing a deep dive into the life, the complexities, and the very controversial legacy of Sigmund Freud. He was born Sigismund Shlomo Freud back in 1856 in Moravia.
And our mission here is really to trace his incredible path from this driven, ambitious researcher who was, also using narcotics.
Right, we'll get to that.
All the way through his huge theoretical break to becoming the architect of a movement that completely redefined how we think about identity, memory, and, well, all of mental.
We're trying to understand the man who made the unconscious famous, but also how his own personal life, his own neuroses, ended up shaping these theories that he presented as universal.
To really get a handle on psychoanalysis, you have to start with his childhood. The foundations were all laid there.
Okay, so where do we begin?
He was born in Freiburg, Moravia in 1856. His family was part of a Jewish community that was really struggling economically, and he later described those times as, quote, hard.
And on top of that hardship, there was this almost mythic expectation placed on him from day one.
Yes. The source material talks about this incredible family legend. Apparently, an old peasant woman prophesied at his birth that the world had just been given a great man.
Wow. Can you imagine starting your life with that kind of pressure?
Yeah.
Especially when your first few years are spent in a single room above a blacksmith shop.
It's an incredible tension, isn't it? The cramped, struggling reality versus this grand, preordained destiny. And that really defined his early psychology.
We'll talk about his parents. His father, Jacob.
Jacob was 40 when Sigmund was born, already a grandfather. And their relationship was close, but it was defined by this deep
and that ambivalence really comes to a head in one specific story, one anecdote that Freud obsessed over his whole life.
Right. The story of the cap.
Yeah.
Jacob, who was a wool merchant, told young Sigmund about how a Christian bigot on the street abused him and knocked his new fur cap into the mud.
And what did Jacob do?
He just meekly picked it up and walked away. He chose survival over confrontation.
And for young Freud, this was just devastating.
Profoundly so. He saw his father's response as unheroic. It was a source of deep shame and disappointment. He later theorized that this one incident was so psychologically damaging that he spent the rest of his childhood trying to compensate for it by idolizing these powerful, heroic military figures.
Specifically Hannibal, right? The Carthaginian general who fought Rome.
Exactly. Hannibal became this symbol of the strong, defiant, victorious man that his own father, in the context of anti-Semitic Vienna, just couldn't be. It was more than a childhood hero. It was a psychological defense mechanism.
Okay, so what about his mother, Amalia?
Amelia was 21 when Sigmund, her first child, was born. She's described as vivacious, sharp, intelligent. Freud himself said he inherited her passionate temper.
But their relationship was also conflict.
Very. She was often absent, either due to her own ill health or because she was constantly pregnant. She had 7 more children after Sigmund. So you have this tension between her intense devotion to him, her golden seed, and her actual physical and emotional unavailability.
And that creates some serious attachment.
Which were then made worse by 2 early trauma. First, his younger brother Julius, died when he...
And Freud felt guilty.
Enormous. He later admitted he had deeply resented this new baby, this rival for his mother's attention.
Wait, let's just pause on that for a second. The idea that this incredibly rigorous scientist believed his own psyche was shaped by essentially wishing his baby brother. That's such a potent mix of subjective feeling and scientific ambition.
It is, and it's a preview of his entire method, using his own life as the data for universal humans.
What was the second trauma?
The firing of his Catholic Czech nursemaid. She was a huge figure in his early life, even took him to church. She was fired for stealing, and this happened right around the time his mother was giving birth.
And this triggered something in him.
A severe, immediate anxiety. He developed this intense fear that his mother would suffer the same fate, that she would be dismissed, abandoned, or even die.
And then on top of all this internal drama, the family's external world collapsed.
Right. In 1859, his father's wool business failed, partly due to modernization, but also critically, due to rising anti-Semitic escape. The family has to pack up.
And the move itself is another source of trauma.
It is. On that train journey to Vienna, Freud developed a severe phobia of rail travel. It was a phobia that lasted his entire life.
To the point where, as an adult, he would insist on traveling separately from his own family.
Yes. And years later, during his self-analysis, he came up with a potential reason why. He believed the anxiety attack on the train might have been triggered by seeing his pregnant mother naked during the journey.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's this nexus of fear, vulnerability, his mother's sexuality, and the general chaos of the move that he believed cemented his adult anxiety.
So they get to Vienna, they settle in the Jewish quarter, and this cultural context is essential. They're living with prejudice, where success is basically about survival.
But they're also part of the Jewish Enlightenment, the Haskalah. It was a movement that promoted secular education, rational thought, and fitting into broader European society.
So Freud, as part of this first generation with new freedoms, really embraces that. He feels like he's found a secure home in the liberal, modern Vienna.
He does, but there's a contradiction in their finance. He always claimed the family was poor, but the reality seems a bit more complex.
They had servants, went to the theater.
Exactly, and they held family council meetings. These are not the habits of a truly impoverished family. The truth is, all the family's resources were focused on him.
On Golden Siggy.
The one and only. His mother gave him that nickname, and he was given his own private room just for study, which is a massive privilege in a crowded apartment.
And academically, he was a star.
Absolutely brilliant. Taught at home at first, then entered public school at 9, and was, in his own words, top of my class for 7 years. He mastered Greek, Latin, French, English, Hebrew.
So the external picture is one of success, but internally?
Internally, it's a much more complex story. His sister described him as pedantic, a bit pompous. He himself knew he was phobic, obsessive, prone to depression, and driven by what he called a thirst for grandeur.
But he also had this painful self-awareness. He knew he was awkward. He wrote that he lacked that indefinite something that attracts other people.
So you have this man with immense internal pressure in him, but also this deep social insecurity. And this is the person who would go on to argue that internal conflict is the very base of art.
So given all that family pressure for him to be a great man, you'd think he would have gone into law or something lucrative.
That was the expectation. But in 1873, he went a completely different way. He chose biological sciences. He was absolutely fascinated by Darwin.
He wasn't aiming to be just a practicing doctor.
No, not at all. He entered Vienna Medical School at 17, but his real goal was to be a scientific theorist. He wanted to find the universal laws that govern the human animal.
And his early research was, well, it was about eels.
It was. In 1875, he was in Trieste trying to solve a major zoological puzzle of the day, were eels hermaphroditic.
It sounds so far removed from psychoanalysis.
It is, but it shows his dedication to meticulous, observable science. And that work impressed Ernst Brücke, a major figure in the very rigorous materialist Helmholtz school of medicine.
Okay, so Brücke takes him on.
Yes. In his lab, Freud studies the nervous. He does some really impressive work on the continuity between the nervous systems of lower and higher animals. He even comes incredibly close to formulating the neuron theory.
But he misses out.
He does. It's a pattern of near misses in his early career. But it's in this circle that he meets Josef Breuer, a respected physician who was 50.
Another mentor figure.
Another father. Breuer supported him emotionally and financially. So Freud gets through his military service, translates some philosophy, and graduates Distinction 1.
But then his personal life complicates.
In 1882, he meets Martha Bernays. She's from an Orthodox Jewish family, well-educated, and he falls for her hard. Proposes within 2 months.
And then they have to wait 4 years to actually get married.
A 4-year engagement. And the reason was purely financial. Freud's income as a junior researcher was tiny. He was still getting money from his own father.
That must have created a lot of pressure.
It meant they wrote to each other daily, these incredibly substantive letters about politics, Darwin, everything. But his letters also show this intense, jealous, and sometimes brutally honest side of.
Like when he told her she wasn't beautiful.
Exactly. He wrote, "I know you are not beautiful in a painter's sense." Now, he meant it as a sort of compliment about her inner, but it's an astonishingly blunt thing to say to your fiancé.
It speaks to that abrasive, analytical personality, does he? Just has to dissect everything.
And he had this furious falling out with her family, especially her brother Eli, over a small loan. He didn't speak to him for years. It's that pattern, intense loyalty, and then a dramatic, bitter break if he feels.
So to finally marry Martha, he needs a real job.
A real income. He has to shift from pure research to clinical medicine. He works his way through the general hospital surgery, psychiatry, and becomes known as a good neuropathologist, skilled at finding obscure brain. By 1885, he's a private dozen, an unpaid university lecturer.
And this pressure for money and fame leads him directly to the most notorious chapter of his early career.
The magical substance.
Cocaine.
Yes. Between 1884 and 1887, he publishes 6 papers promoting the wonders of cocaine.
He used it himself, right?
Oh, yes. He took it for his depression and wrote to Martha that the, quote, magical substance lifted me to the heights. He claimed it could cure morphine addiction, neurasthenia, all sorts.
Even though his colleagues were warning him.
Yes. He was adamant, though he always insisted he wasn't addicted himself.
I have to stop you there. This is a man trained in a highly rigorous scientific school, and he's promoting a drug based almost entirely on his own enthusiastic, subjective experience. It sounds like his ambition just steamrolled his scientific caution.
That is the paradox, precise. He was so desperate for a breakthrough discovery, for the big cure, that it just clouded his judgment.
And the irony is he was right about one thing.
He was. He correctly identified its potential as a local anesthetic.
But then his personal life got in the way.
It did. While he was away visiting Martha, another doctor, Karl Koller, presented the definitive paper on using cocaine in eye surgery. Freud missed his shot at fame and fortune.
A devastating.
Huge. He later wrote that he bore his fiancée no grudge for her interruption of my work, but you can feel the sting. And then things got much, much worse.
He'd been giving the drug to his friend, Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow.
Yes, to treat his morphine. Instead, Marxow became horrifically addicted to the cocaine and died 5 years later. Terrible tragedy.
And Freud's reputation in Vienna was?
It was in tatters. The medical community saw him as reckless, and yet for all the disaster, some of his early essays were seen as quite visionary. He's now credited as one of the founders of modern psychopharmacology, even if his first big attempt was a catastrophe.
So after the whole cocaine scandal, Freud really needed to hit the reset button.
He did, and he got a huge opportunity in 1885. He won a fellowship to go to Paris and study with the world-famous neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot.
Charcot was a huge deal, the founder of modern neurology.
An absolute giant. And his specialty was hysteria, which at the time was this big catch-all term for all sorts of symptoms that didn't have an obvious physical cause.
And Freud was just captivated by his methods.
Completely. Especially Charcot's use of hypnosis. He would do these dramatic public demonstrations where he'd hypnotize women and be able to create and then remove hysterical symptoms, like a paralysis in their arm.
So it showed him that the mind could directly affect the body.
Exactly. And Charcot became his next essential mentor, another powerful father figure. Freud was so impressed, he wrote to Martha that leaving Charcot's lectures was like leaving Notre Dame, that he had a new perception of perfection.
But that warm reception didn't last. When he gets back to Vienna,
he gets a very cold shock. In 1886, he gives a lecture on male hysteria, arguing it wasn't just a female. And the Viennese Society of Physicians basically dismisses him. They say it's unoriginal.
Which pushes him out of academia and into private practice.
Right. He gets married to Martha in September 1886, sets up his practice, and at first he's using the conventional treatments, electrotherapy, things like that. But they don't work.
So he starts moving toward the method his old mentor Breuer had been using.
The talk. And this collaboration leads to their hugely important book in 1895, Studies on.
And the big conclusion of that book is that hysterics suffer mainly from reminiscence.
It's a radical idea that the symptoms, the physical pain, are caused by forgotten trauma. And if you can bring those memories into consciousness, you can cure the person.
This is where he moves from hypnosis to free association.
Yes. He calls it the listening cure, or the talk. The patient lies on the couch and just says whatever comes into their mind, no matter how random or embarrassed, and the analyst listens for the hidden threads.
It's a massive conceptual leap. But how did it work in practice? The sources mention a key patient, Frau Cicely M.
Yes, the Baroness Anna von. He worked with her twice a day for 3. She had pain, memory loss, a drug addiction.
And the results were mixed.
Very difficult. A symptom would disappear, only for a new one to pop up in its place. And what's really critical is that a modern reading of his notes suggests Freud wasn't just a neutral listener. He was often leading the patient towards the interpretations that fit his theories.
So he was looking for confirmation, not just data.
You could say that. And by the time the book was published, his relationship with Breuer was already falling apart. Breuer couldn't handle Freud's absolute and excessive formulations. Freud just had this need to be definitively right about everything.
So he's isolated again.
Yeah.
And what does he do?
He finds a new intellectual partner, of course. This time, it's Wilhelm Flies, an ENT specialist from Berlin. He was younger, very self-confident, a brilliant talker.
And Flies had some pretty wild theories himself.
Oh, absolutely. He believed the nose was a sexual organ that governed life cycles and that everyone was fundamentally bisexual. But their intense correspondence pushes Freud toward his most controversial idea yet, the seduction.
Okay, what was that?
In 1896, based on just 18 patients, Freud stands up and declares that the single cause of hysteria is premature sexual experience, actual childhood sex.
He's saying that sexual trauma is the root of all neurosis. How did that go over?
About as well as you'd expect.
Yeah.
It was widely criticized. His peers called it a scientific fairy tale. It just seemed too simple, too universal, and it relied on patient memories that he verified.
But then comes the big turning. A year later, in 1897, he retracts.
He does. He writes to Flies and says, "I no longer believe in my seduction theory."
Why?
Because he realized a few. First, the sheer number of fathers his patients were accusing. It just wasn't statistically plausible. But more importantly, he realized these weren't memories of real events. They were fantasies that represented deep, powerful, frustrated.
And that's the monumental shift. The cause of neurosis isn't an external event anymore. It's an internal conflict.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to that dream about Irma.
Right. The patient Irma was based on a real person. Emma X.
Yes, who Freud had referred to, Fly. And Flies, using his bizarre nose theory, operated on her. But he accidentally left a bunch of surgical gauze packed in the wound,
which made her incredibly sick and left her permanently disfigured.
So Freud's dream about Irma's botched injection wasn't random at all. It was a direct reflection of his guilt and anxiety over what his friend had done and his desire to blame someone.
So the stage is set for his biggest breakthrough. It starts with his father's death in 1896.
It does. Jacob's death leaves him feeling, as he put it, quite up. It sends him into a deep depression, triggers his most intense and formal self-analysis, starts studying his own slips of the tongue.
And he connects the dots back to his child, to the anxiety he felt when his nursemaid.
And he realizes that his earliest anxiety was the fear of losing his mother. Why? Because in his own words, he was in love with my mother and jealous of my father.
The Oedipus complex.
This was the universal law he had been searching for his whole life. He wrote to Flies, saying this insight proved the gripping power of Oedipus Rex, the fantasy of killing the rival parent and possessing the other one. For Freud, this repressed wish became the single most important event in human development.
And this all goes into his masterpiece, The Interpretation of Dreams.
Published in 1899, it defines dreams not as junk, but as the fulfillments of wishes, driven by these repressed childhood desires. It was the moment that shifted the focus of medicine, physical brain, to the complex, hidden inner world of the mind.
So once he's published these foundational ideas, Freud needs to get them out to a wider audience.
And he does it brilliantly. Books like The Psychopathology of Everyday Life and Jokes and their relation to the subconscious were huge.
These are the books that gave us the Freudian slip.
Exactly. He argued that our everyday mistakes, forgetting a name, saying the wrong word, aren't random. They're determined by our repressed wishes bubbling to the surface. It was a genius way to bring his ideas into every...
And it starts to help his professional life, too.
It does. Despite the anti-Semitism that was still rife in Viennese academia, he had some very well-connected and influential patients who lobbied. And in 1902, he was finally made a professor.
He finally had the legitimacy he'd always...
And his life becomes centered on his home and practice at Burgas 19, where he'd lived for the next 47 years. And that household was run with an iron fist.
So what did a typical day look like for the man mapping the unconscious?
It was incredibly regimented. He'd start seeing patients at 8 a.m. sharp. Each session was exactly 55 minutes.
55, not an hour.
55. Then a 5-minute break for tea before the next patient. Lunch was at 1:05 precisely, and he expected his family to already be at the table when he arrived.
It sounds like a military operation.
It was. Then he'd take his daily walk, stopping at a cigar shop, his barber. He loved his collection of antiquities. A dealer would visit him every couple of weeks. Then more patients, dinner, and then he would work, writing, until 2 in the
machine. And what about his inner circle, his personal life?
It was complicated. His wife, Martha, ran the domestic sphere, but his closest intellectual companion was actually her sister, Minna, who moved in with them.
Another triangulation.
Classic pattern for him. He loved to travel, but he'd take Minna or his brother on his big trips to Italy and Greece. He took Martha to the mountain. Outside of the family, his main social outlet was a Jewish men's, the B'nai B'rith.
As he's building this movement, he starts publishing case studies to prove his theory. Let's talk about Dora.
Ida Bauer. She was a teenager with a nervous cough and speech problems, and the case was really about transference.
Explain transference again.
It's the idea that the patient unconsciously redirects feelings they have for important people from their childhood like a parent onto the animal.
It's still a huge concept in therapy today, but how did Freud use it?
Well, Ida's problems seemed to stem from unwanted sexual advances from a family friend, but Freud insisted that her symptoms weren't about the trauma. He argued they were a repression of her own sexual attraction to the man.
He's ignoring what she's telling her to fit his theory.
Essentially, yes. And when Ida quit therapy after just a few months, Freud took it as proof he was right. He decided she left because she was frustrated that he, Freud, hadn't made a move on her.
Wow, that's a huge leap. It really shows the risk of the analyst's power in that dynamic.
It does. And he applied this same kind of detective work to historical figures, most famously Leonardo da Vinci.
He called that essay the only beautiful thing I have ever written.
He did. He took a single childhood memory of da Vinci's about a bird flying into his cradle and built a whole psychoanalysis on it. Freud claimed the bird was a vulture, which symbolized repressed homosexual drives stemming from being raised by a single mother.
But there's a problem with that.
A big one. The bird da Vinci wrote about was a kite, not a vulture. And his mother wasn't single for long. Freud was, well, he was shaping the facts to fit the theory he wanted to prove.
The need to confirm his system was stronger than the need for factual accuracy.
It seems so. Then there was the rat man, a young soldier with obsessive, cruel thoughts. Freud linked the word rat to a whole bunch of his issues and claimed a story the man heard about torture with rats had, quote, fanned into a flame all his premature, suppressed impulse.
Again, positioning the patient as the one with the hidden aggressive desires.
Yes. It reinforced this idea that the psychoanalyst could see the truth beneath the patient's own understanding of themselves.
By this point, he's not just a clinician. He's building a movement. He starts the Wednesday Psychological Society,
which some of its members saw as a new religion, with Freud as its prophet. It later became the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, designed to spread his theories, and he needed a successor.
Carl Jung.
Carl Jung, 20 years younger, Swiss, handsome Protestant. He was the perfect heir to take the movement beyond its Viennese Jewish.
But they had some pretty major disagreements from the start.
Fundamentally, Jung just didn't buy that sexual repression was the only source of all neurosis, but Freud was so desperate for a successor, he just overlooked it.
He became obsessed with Jung.
He even defended Jung when he got into a romantic affair with a patient, Sabina Spielrein, basically telling Jung it was her fault, not his.
But the philosophical cracks just kept getting wider.
Yes. Another key member, Alfred Adler, resigned because he believed social drives were more important than sexual. And Freud, seeing the writing on the wall with Jung, decided to protect his legacy.
He forms a secret committee.
In 1912, yes, a group of 5 loyal followers. He gave them all gold rings. It was their job to protect and spread the pure gospel of psychoanalysis.
And the break with Jung, finally.
It does. In 1913, it's ugly. Freud later denounces both Jung and Adler as heretics. It's that lifelong pattern. Intense loyalty followed by a vicious break. He was a man who could not tolerate dissent, even analyzing his own daughter Anna, which created its own set of controversy later on.
And then in 1914, the world that Freud knew just completely shatters with the start of World War I.
It does. At first, he's patriotic, his sons are in the army, but that doesn't last. The reality of the war just sends him into depression.
Life in Vienna becomes very
desperate. There are food and fuel shortages. His son Martin is captured and becomes a prisoner in war, and Freud is just horrified by the excess of brutality, cruelty, and mendacity of so-called civilized Europe.
And the war forces him to really formalize his ideas about how therapy should be conducted.
Yes, he lays down the law. He says analysis can only work through transference, and the analyst must remain a neutral, anonymous, blank screen for the patient to project on.
These became the rules for decades, even though he himself didn't always follow them.
Not at all. But the biggest challenge the war presented was to his core theory, the pleasure principle.
Because of shell shock, PTSD.
Exactly. Soldiers were having these recurring, traumatic nightmares of combat. They weren't dreaming of fulfilled wishes. They were reliving horror.
So if dreams are wish fulfillment, why would anyone's mind choose to repeat a trauma over and over?
It's a crisis for his theory. And this crisis, combined with his own profound personal grief, his beloved daughter Sophie died at 20, leads to his darkest and most radical.
The death drive, Thanatos.
Yeah. He concludes that the fundamental drive in humans isn't just for pleasure, for life, for eros. There's an equally powerful drive for peace, for dissolution, for a return to an inorganic.
He famously wrote, "The aim of all life is death."
a profoundly pessimist. He defined this death drive as an instinct of destruction, which could be turned inward in self-sabotage or out against the world.
And this idea, as dark as it is, had a huge influence.
Lasting, and it became central to trauma studies, to existential psychology. It gave thinkers a way to understand self-destruction and aggression that went beyond simple sexual repression.
And to explain this inner battle between the life and death drives, he refines his model of the mind.
In 1923, he gives us the tripartite psyche. He realizes the simple conflict between the ego, which deals with reality, and the id, our animal instinct, wasn't.
So he adds the superego.
The superego, the moral conscience, it's formed from the rules and prohibitions of our parents and society. It's the punitive internal voice that the ego is struggling against.
He then takes these ideas and applies them to society as a whole.
In group psychology, he argues that people in a crowd are primed to over-identify who becomes their ego ideal. He has this wild theory that it's based on an inherited memory of a prehistoric patricide.
It's a controversial theory, but it's a powerful attempt to explain why people so easily give up their individuality to charismatic leaders.
And his pessimism really peaks in one of his most famous books, Civilization and Its Discontents,
where he basically concludes that civilization is a trade-off. We give up our instinctual freedom for security, but the price is constant unhappiness and neurosis.
Because the superego forces us to repress our instincts. And he talks about the aggression we see everywhere, arguing that people have this need for conflict, what he calls the narcissism of small differences.
The idea that we fight most bitterly with the groups that are most similar to us.
Which feels incredibly relevant today.
And while he's writing all this, his own body is beginning to fail him.
Tragically, yes. After a lifetime of smoking 20 cigars a day, he's diagnosed with mouth cancer in 1923. He goes through 32 incredibly painful. It leaves him with impaired.
But he keeps working.
He has to, for financial. But some of his later patients, like the psychiatrist Joseph Wardis, felt he was becoming out of touch. He still held this view of homosexuality as a pathological condition that impressed.
And in his final years, despite being an atheist, he becomes obsessed with religion.
He writes, The Future of an Illusion, where he calls religion a collective neurosis, a wish fulfillment with our fear of hell. And then his final book, Moses and Monotheism, argues that Moses was actually a highly polemical act right as the world was falling apart.
The storm finally arrives at his doorstep.
It does. His books are burned in Berlin in 1933. In 1938, the Wehrmacht enters Vienna. Brown shirts raid his home. His daughter Anna detained by the Gestapo.
And he's finally forced.
He agrees to emigrate to England. He's welcomed there, made a member of the Royal Society.
But the tragedy isn't over.
No. The 4 sisters he left behind were all murdered by the Nazis. Freud, now in terrible constant pain from his cancer, works until the very end.
In September 1939, he knows it's over.
He calls his doctor, Max Schur, and reminds him of an agreement they had with his daughter Anna's consent. Schur gives him a final dose of more. Sigmund Freud died on September 23, #outro. What a life. I mean, what an extraordinary, complex journey. He was, without a doubt, an intellectual titan, brilliant writer, incredibly cultured.
And someone who just had the courage to defy Victorian convention. He created 23 volumes of work that changed the world.
And his practical legacy is undeniable. The talking cure, even if it looks different now, is still his. He gave us the vocabulary. Transference, repression, displacement. These are still foundational terms in psychology.
Even when he was wrong, like with the seduction theory, he opened the door for a better understanding of trauma and memory.
But his biggest contribution wasn't a tech. It was a whole new perspective. His revolutionary focus on childhood, on family dynamics, on our constant inner conflict. It completely reshaped how the 20th century understood what it means.
He forced us to take the mind seriously, to see it as this complex, dynamic thing that's often at war with itself, whether it's the ego versus the superego or our instincts versus civilization.
So this brings us to the ultimate paradox, and maybe a final thought for you to take away. Freud was a man of intense contrast.
An atheist who couldn't stop writing about religion. A scientist who kept bending the facts to fit his theories.
An advocate for analytical neutrality who had a dramatic falling out with nearly every single one of his close colleagues.
So given that his most famous, most provocative theories, the Oedipus complex, the death drive, didn't come from big objective studies, but were born directly from his own anxieties, his own self-analysis after his father died, his own personal tragedy. What does that tell us?
Does the personal experience found, or does it fundamentally law at science?